Hi guys, so today we're going to start our next part, which is Chapter 4, Section 2. I mismarked that on here, which is governing the colonies. All right, so here's just some vocabulary that you need to know ahead of time. The first one is legislature, which is a group of people who have the power to make laws. The second is the Bill of Rights, which is a written list of freedoms that a government promises to protect. Habeas corpus is a principle that a person cannot be held in prison without being charged with a specific crime. Freedom of the press, the right of journalists to publish the truth without restriction or penalty, and libel, the publishing of a statement that is damaging to a person's reputation. I want you to pause the video right now, and I want you to write down the definitions on your worksheet that I have handed you to these vocabulary words. You will need these vocabulary words for your test. So pause the video, write down the definitions, and when you are ready, hit unpause. All right. So, the English parliamentary tradition, we have to go back all the way to 1215 to kind of see where we get our rules and structures from. And the document that we look at most is the Magna Carta. For a while, the Magna Carta, which is so important to the American government, was actually being housed at the National Archives with our Constitution and Bill of Rights, because it is that important to our government. The English nobles forced King John to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, and it was the first document that placed restrictions on English rulers' power. It also guaranteed the right to trial by jury. So this limited the king's power and increased the power of the nobles. It was incredibly important. We then have Parliament in England. So they were created to advise the king. They eventually become known as the Parliament. At first, they were known as the Great Council. There was a two-house legislature, much like our Congress. So you begin to see where these ideas come from. There was the House of Lords, who were nobles that inherited their titles, and the House of Commons, who were members that were elected. But you had to be a rich landowner and a man. Those were the only people who were allowed into the House of Commons. They had the right to approve new taxes. But then there was an English Civil War, and it ended up being Parliament versus Charles I over the rights of the people versus the king making all of the rules. Parliament actually won, and they executed Charles I. So that shows you the power of the Parliament. In 1688, Parliament removed King James II from the throne. They invited his daughter Mary and her husband William, those who are familiar with William and Mary, to rule. This was called the Glorious Revolution. So again, showing you the power of Parliament. King William and Queen Mary signed the English Bill of Rights. We have a Bill of Rights. England had it first. So again, looking at where we are getting these ideas from. It upheld habeas corpus and required Parliament to meet regularly and declare that no monarch could levy or give a tax or an army without Parliament's consent. Think about what happens in the future to the colonies. We are taxed and taxed and taxed. But this is written into the English Bill of Rights. So you could see where the colonists would be very frustrated at that in the future. All right, now let's get to the colonies. So 1701, Pennsylvania. England forced William Penn to agree that only the General Assembly could make laws. So William Penn wanted his own government governing Pennsylvania, and England says no. Parliament, and thus our Parliament representatives in Pennsylvania, are the only ones that can make laws. This upsets William Penn. The king could overturn the laws made by the General Assembly. So even if the members of parliament who are working in Pennsylvania, ultimately it could get to the king and be completely overturned. This meant that neither Penn nor his council had any part in lawmaking in Pennsylvania. All of the lawmaking was done in England. By 1760, every British colony in North America had a legislature of some kind, but almost all of them clashed with the colonial governors appointed by the king, because the colonial governors had the king and England's best interest, not the colonists and the colonies' best interest at heart. Remember, there's an Atlantic Ocean separating them, so it's not like they're, close together when these decisions are being made. Colonies offered more political rights than England. This is a really important statement. You had more political rights in the colonies than you did in England. 50 to 75% of white males in the colonies could vote, which was much more. It was about 30% in England. White men had to be landowners in order to vote. Women could not vote. Native Americans could not vote. And Africans or slaves or freed people could not vote. All right, let's get to freedom of the press. So, 1735, freedom of the press was established. It's late considering when the colonies were founded. We have John Peter Zenger. He was the publisher of the New York Weekly Journal. He criticized the government, and because of that, he was arrested, and he was charged with libel. Think back to your vocabulary words in the beginning. Guess who his lawyer was? Andrew Hamilton. Psych, not Alexander Hamilton, but that's a really good way to remember who his lawyer was, but they are not the same Hamilton. They argued that Zenger's facts were true, but they could not be considered libel. So the argument was, well, if they're reporting the truth and only the truth, you cannot sue them for libel. He was found not guilty, thus establishing the freedom of the press. All right, let's talk about trade. So we have this theory of mercantilism, which talks about regulating trade. And hint, hint, this little picture will show up, hint, 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 on your test, because it's a really good understanding of how the theory of mercantilism works. So the theory said that colonists existed to serve the economic needs of their parent country. Let's go over this again. Colonies only existed to serve England. That was the only purpose. So everything that the colonies grew, everything that the colonies produced, everything that the colonies had to be sold at a low price, well beneath their actual worth, back to England. And then England would turn around and sell them at a very, very high price to all of the other European countries. This was how this circle worked. So we're talking about gold, silver, fur, lumber, and food. The colonies were expected to sell at very low prices, and England would then sell them back to everybody else at very high prices. So did the colonies make a lot of money? No. Who was making all of the money? England. So now we get to the Navigation Acts. Shipments from Europe to England had to go through England first. So if France was shipping something over to the colonies, they had to go to England first and then to the colonies. Any imports to England from the colonies had to be shipped on a British ship. They couldn't be shipped on a colony ship. They had to be shipped on an official British ship. The colonies could sell key products such as tobacco and sugar only to England. There was no trade with any other country. That means England can essentially pay them whatever they want because they are not allowed to trade with any other country and there's no competition. So again, we're starting to see where the anger comes from. All right, so let's just look quickly at this lovely little cartoon. So don't export any hats, woolens, or iron since these things already are made in England. So this is the British government saying you can't send all these things out because then you'll be in competition with the workers in England. Send that tobacco, though, because England doesn't grow tobacco. Send it over. You can't export anything except in English or colonial ships. Ah, that's so angry. Take that cargo to England to be taxed before you land it in the colonies. So you can't ship directly to Africa and you can't ship directly to Europe. You have to do all of this trade back and forth. So it has to go from here to here to here to here to here. It's like a triangle, right? But we can't complete the last leg of the triangle where we could go directly from the colonies onwards. All right. That is our lesson for today. Good job.